Hey everybody, it's Stuart Stevens. I can't tell you what a pleasure and honor it is to be with Garrett Graff today. Garrett, thanks for joining us. I know this is a big week for you, the launch of your new book. Um, I'm not going to embarrass Garrett here, but I think he really is one of the very, very most important and extraordinary writers working today. Um, we have a shared love of Vermont. Garrett's dad was a legendary figure in Vermont journalism who I remember reading when I was at Middlebury. Um, and Garrett has carved out a unique, really genre of modern oral history that is unlike anything else anyone is doing. And his latest book is about the Manhattan Project. The Devil Reads Toward the Sky. This is not a short book. And on one level, I'm sort of pissed at Garrett because he completely ruined my weekend last time because I made the mistake of starting it on Friday night and didn't get much sleep all weekend. It really is an extraordinary book. But his other work, he's written so many books, but his previous book about D-Day, when the sea came alive, is incredible. And I would just, I'll shut up in a second here, but I think these are great books to both read and listen to hear these different voices as it was. But anyway, Garrett, thank you for joining us.
Thank you so much. That's a very, very kind introduction.
I just have so many questions for you. First, just like writer to writer, how do you do this? Like, what is your process for? I mean, I've read you talk some about it in the introduction to your latest book about the tremendous number of sources that you have to go down. But like, just take us through. Like, you have this idea, you want to do a book about the Manhattan Project. How long does it take you, and how do you what is your process here?
Yeah. So what has attracted me to World War II and oral history in this moment, this as you know, is my third book length volume of oral history. I did one in 2019 that was about 9/11 that was called The Only Plane in the Sky, and then last year about D-Day, when the sea came alive, and then this year about the Manhattan Project, timed, of course, to this week's 80th anniversaries of the bombing of Hiroshima and Nagasaki, and then the surrender next week of Japan. And to me, what attracted me at this moment is, I think these 80th anniversaries of World War II, as they have been passing by over the last few years, feel so especially poignant because they also mark the unofficial passing of the last of the greatest generation, the generation that fought World War II, survived World War II, and in Japan, the last survivors, the Haibakusa of Hiroshima and Nagasaki. And so we have at this moment effectively every first person memory we will ever have of these events of World War II. And to me, the power of oral history, and the reason that I wanted to do oral histories of both of these events, is I think that there is a unique power that comes in hearing events in the first person, in the words, in the experiences, in the memories of the people who lived them, that lets you experience and understand these moments before people knew the outcome. That I think so often in history,
that's so interesting.
The way that we teach history, and I love narrative history. I've written a ton of narrative history. I read a ton of narrative history. But it often makes events seem neater and cleaner and simpler and more preordained than they felt to anyone at the time.
Yeah.
look at our modern moment. None of us know where this story that we are living through right now goes.
Speak for
One
yourself.
of
I've got it all figured out. Don't worry.
one of the things that I have said since 2021, that was sort of my warning in the Biden years, is we don't know where we are in the Donald Trump story. We don't know whether we are in the beginning, the middle, or the end of the Donald Trump story. And to take that and sort of go back to an event like the Manhattan Project, this book pulls together 500 voices of the people who lived this, from the scientists and soldiers to the policymakers and generals to the Japanese government and the civilians and survivors on the ground in Hiroshima and Nagasaki. You get to understand how these events felt at a moment when, embarking on the early stage of the Manhattan Project, they didn't know whether Adolf Hitler was going to get the bomb first. They didn't know whether the Allies would win World War II. They didn't know whether an atom bomb would even work. And you begin to see, I think, the audacity and the daring of these events in a new way, by understanding what it felt like to live them at a time when they were uncertain. Sort of similar to D-Day in some ways, where we view that as one of the greatest, the greatest days for democracy in the history of the world, greatest days for freedom. But when you read the letters and the voices and the memories of the men in, the landing ships heading across the English Channel on the night of June 5th, or the paratroopers and the transports heading to the hedgerows in Normandy, they don't know that they're going to be part of something heroic and triumphal. They're worried about whether they're going to survive the next day, whether they're going to let their comrades down in combat, whether they're even going to live to see the end of the next day. And I think for me, you ask about how I sort of pull these together, and Vermonter to Vermonter, the thing that I actually always compare it to is making maple syrup. That I
love that.
Spend months and months reading hundreds of oral histories, memoirs, in this case, Nobel Prize lectures, government hearing testimony, actually the J. Robert Oppenheimer security clearance, 1,000-page transcript was a big help in this project. And then doing oral history is in some ways the opposite of normal writing, because it is subtractive, not additive. Like you start with this enormous pile. The first draft of this book was about 1.4 million words. That's 3,500 pages. And then, much like boiling maple syrup, you just boil off 95% of that to get it down to the essence of the story, and try to interweave these 500 voices in a way that can tell this story anew, and I think I hope readers back in the drama of not knowing how these events unfold.
Talk to me about, there's so many voices here. When you do this, do favorite characters begin to emerge in your mind? Like, voices that we haven't heard enough of, and how does that work?
Yeah. So all of the above. You definitely come away with some favorite characters, people who are particularly colorful or interesting. Often they are not people that are the most prominent voices in history. To me, a big part of what was exciting about this project, though, was also approaching the Manhattan Project at scale. And what I mean by that is I think we often oversimplify and over romanticize the Manhattan Project
Yeah.
as the story of J. Robert Oppenheimer and his band of merry physicists on a
Yeah.
mesa in Los Alamos.
Yeah.
And all of that is true to a certain degree. Oppenheimer was a wonderful film. It's actually, one of the things I came away from my book research with was it's actually a stunningly historically accurate film for what for what a movie normally does. But what you really come to understand, I think, about the Manhattan Project is the scale and the scope and the audacity of it lay in the industrial might that the United States was able to bring to bear on this project in World War II in a way that no other country at the time could. And what I mean by that is, I think we often talk about World War II by talking about the places where it was fought. Bastogne, Okinawa, Guadalcanal, Leyte Gulf, Omaha Beach, El Alamein. But where World War II was won was here on the home front. And it was won in the Ford Motor Company bomber factories at Willow Run in Michigan. It was won in the shipyards and landing craft factories of Higgins Industry in New Orleans. It was won in the UK code breaking labs at Bletchley Park, and it was won in the labs and the factories of the Manhattan Project. It was the invention of radar and the proximity fuse and the industrial output of the United States and the invention of the atomic bomb that really turns the tide for the Allies in this war, where we outproduce and outbuild Germany and Japan and the Axis powers. And you really see that I spent a big chunk of this book on the stories of Oak Ridge, Tennessee, the University of Chicago, and Hanford, Washington, which are the main production facilities for uranium and plutonium. And these are secret cities built in wartime amid labor shortages and material shortages. In Oak Ridge's case, carved out of remote mountain valleys. In Hanford, Washington, carved out of a desert in eastern Washington, that are, forests and orchards in 1941, and by 1945 are cities of 100,000 people apiece, with factories the size of multiple football fields. Hanford, Washington has this series of factories known as the Queen Marys, where they process plutonium that are like larger than an ocean liner. And these factories support these entire communities. I mean, they're building thousands of homes a month in these places. Hanford, Washington is the largest construction project in the United States during World War II. And no one knows that they exist at all. On August 6th, 1945, the day the Manhattan Project's existence is announced to the world by Harry Truman, the bus system in Oak Ridge, Tennessee, is one of the 10 largest public transit systems in the United States. And it serves a city that is not publicly acknowledged and that doesn't appear on any public map and that no one knows exists. And I think it's sort of in stories of that, and it's the voices of those workers and the factory employees and the firefighters and local police and the cafeteria workers that I bring together in this book that I think really gives you a sense of the true triumph of the Manhattan Project, which I think that the tension and sort of the fascinating part of this book is that the Manhattan Project is arguably one of humanity's greatest triumphs and one of humanity's greatest tragedies all in the same breath.
Yeah, one of the things that I really appreciated about the book was the non-Alamos, Los Alamos sections, because you say there's so much that's been written. There's great novels about Joseph Cannon wrote a great novel called Los Alamos. I mean, and particularly with the Oppenheimer film, that tends to be seen as that is the Manhattan Project, and you get a sense that it was just really a very small part of it that was about the building of the actual weapon, not all of the research. And I thought the University of Chicago sections, the Hanford sections, and the Oak Ridge sections were absolutely fascinating. Um, in a way, I guess it's wrong to say they've been lost, but I don't think that they've been given the attention that they deserve.
Yeah. And I think it's where you see, I think, in some ways, the true audacity of this project, which is in the early day, this is a project that starts at the University of Chicago. They build the first chain reaction in the fall of 1942, which sort of proves the concept that then they're able to go on and build the factories that can then go build the bomb. And you see these physicists starting to sketch out on paper. And, this is World War II. They're not using CAD design. They're not using computers. They're using slide rules and sketch paper about how to build factories that are going to produce kilograms of plutonium at a time when plutonium has never been seen by the naked eye. That at the start of the war, plutonium exists only in literally microscopic amounts. And here you have these scientists saying, okay, how do we build a factory that will churn this out on the scale of kilograms, in a year from now, in 18 months from now? And it is an incredible level of science and technology, and again, industrial might that I think comes through. And then you see, Los Alamos, again, is a part of the story. It is an important part of the story, but it's really just one part of this much bigger story, because you not only have the factories and 200,000 people working away there. To me, the other part of this that I really loved is the story of the 509th Bomb Composite Group, which is the unit that the U.S. military creates to drop the atomic bomb.
Yeah.
And I think, again, that's a part of this story that has been generally lost in the telling that so focuses on Los Alamos, where Colonel Paul Tibbets, who we know as the pilot of the Enola Gay, the plane that drops the bomb on Hiroshima, is also the commander of this 509th Composite Group. And he is not some totally random pilot who happens to be sort of next up on the duty roster in Tinian in the Marianas Islands on the morning of August 6th when the atomic bomb mission comes up. He is, one of, if not the best bomber pilot in the U.S. military in World War II, has this very successful career in Europe, comes back to the United States to start the training program for the B-29 bomber. The B-29 bomber, actually the most expensive weapon system of World War II, more expensive than the atomic bomb Manhattan Project itself. And it is the bomber that we specifically designed to bomb the Japanese home islands. And it's early in its development. It has all of those normal early plane gremlins. And they're starting to see the male pilots in the Army Air Forces, balk at flying this thing. That they think it's sort of too big, too scary, too unreliable. And so Paul Tibbets comes up with this plan where he sort of goes down south to a air base, finds a couple of WASPs, the women air service pilots, and spends a couple of days teaching them how to fly the B-29, and then hopscotches across the country to the other B-29 bases, where he lands this B-29, and these women pilots jump out once the plane is parked, at which point all the men are too embarrassed to complain about flying the plane, because they're like, well, if a woman can do it, I can certainly do it. And that's the end of the protest over the B-29. So once he gets that program set up, then in the summer and fall of 44, he is called up to this secret project, told about the existence of the Manhattan Project, and asked to build an entire new aviation unit that is going to learn how to drop the atomic bomb, which is a bomb, bigger and heavier and more bulky than any bomb people have ever dropped before. And you also need to drop it in this very specific way where you drop it and turn to get as far away from the blast as you possibly can. Otherwise, you're not going to survive yourself. And goes off and trains this whole unit of B-29 crews, deploys them to Tinian, and most of the crew learn of the existence of the atomic bomb when the Enola Gay is in the air to Japan. I mean, they train this whole time never actually knowing the thing that is the thing that they are training to drop. And you see that secrecy, I think, in all sorts of fun places throughout this project, where, one of my other sort of favorite stories of this is coming back to Oak Ridge. You have the Tennessee Eastman, which is the company that the U.S. government brings in to run the Oak Ridge facilities. This is the middle of wartime, 43, 44. There are labor shortages. And they come up with this plan that they're going to hire young women out of high school to work the uranium processing machines, which are called calutrons. And, all of the Manhattan Project physicists say, there's no way that a, woman with a high school education can be taught to work this. And then what ends up happening is they put them in a head-to-head match between the Berkeley PhDs and the high school girls from Tennessee, and the high school girls outperform the Berkeley PhDs, and these Calutron girls, as they come to be known, run these uranium machines, 24/7 for the better part of a year. And again, most of them only learn the word uranium on August 6, 1945, when the Manhattan Project's existence is announced. They work that entire year in the factories in Oak Ridge, never actually knowing what it is they're doing to contribute to the war effort.
Yeah, in reading this, in a way, it was very personal to me, because without the atomic bomb, I probably wouldn't be here. My dad was on a ship headed to the invasion of Japan. Mm-hmm. And, the casualty rates were it's extraordinary. I've always been a great fan of Paul Fussel's book, Thank God for the Atomic Bomb, because he was also on one of those ships and wrote about it. Yeah. I had never understood that Enola Gay was Tibbets' mother's name.
Yes.
Which I mean, think about that. So we're gonna have this plane that's gonna drop this. That's gonna be destroy this city. I think I'm gonna name it for my mom.
Yeah.
That's such a sort of incredible American touch.
And he only names it, literally a day or two before the dropping of the atomic bomb. And I found this great letter from one of the crewmen that I quote in the book,
Yeah.
who's writing back to his parents from Tinian and says, Colonel Tibbets has finally named our plane. It's the Enola Gay after his mother. It's possible by the time this letter reaches
I
you,
see.
you
Well,
will have already heard of
yeah,
our plane.
yeah, I love that moment. I love that. Well, look, I know you've got to go to 11:30. There's so much we could talk about. I just have to ask the question that I bet you're going to get asked 80 million times in this process if you haven't already. Uh, Today, would it be possible to do something?
Um, so I don't think so.
Mhm.
But let me sort of widen out that answer because I think it actually is important to talk about at this moment, which is what I really worry about today. And from my work, I sort of spend a lot of my days sort of going back and forth between writing history books and thinking
Right.
about how that history applies to now. Um, that what worries me now is at this 80th anniversary of the Manhattan Project, this huge, audacious, triumphal moment in technology and science and research. The Trump administration is attacking and unwinding and crushing all of the pieces of the successful equation that both came together in the Manhattan Project, but then also, I think, served to build the model for the post-war era and how we sort of built the era of educational achievement and economic prosperity that we did in the decades after in the decades after World War II during the Cold War.
Right.
And what I mean by that is, we're watching the decimation of government support for science and technology and research. We're seeing the, literal crushing of higher education and the sort of network of research and science, the openness to immigration, the whole point, the Manhattan Project succeeds. It gets off the ground in the first place because of this wave of mostly Jewish refugee scientists coming to the United States as a beacon of freedom and democracy while they flee the enveloping cloak of Hitler's fascism and the Third Reich in Europe in 39, 40, and 41. The almost every bit of the Manhattan Project genius, with a couple of notable exceptions, comes from old world science centers that, basically are overrun by anti-Semitism, and the scientists flee to the UK, Canada, and the United States, coming with them or bring with them these warnings of the atomic bomb. And I think what the Manhattan Project showed us was how science and technology and higher education can be a core source of national strength. And what the Trump administration is doing right now is destroying that brick by brick at a moment where, importantly, we are, I think, on the cusp of a technology in artificial intelligence that will be as transformative to the world and our economy
Yeah.
as, all of the science that grew out of World War II. And if we are not able to seize this moment and capitalize on it in the way that we, historically would in the last couple of decades, we risk, falling behind at a critical moment in a way that will probably seem irrecoverable in the same way that Britain emerged from the end of World War II as a vastly diminished world power.
Yeah, and look, it's a different conversation. I know you have to go, but I would say this is very deliberate by Trump. I mean, I think you sometimes overcomplicate this. We know that the Russians wanted to elect Donald Trump. They did elect Donald Trump. If you had a wish list of what the Russians would like someone to do to deconstruct the power and influence of America on every front, from we're in the Trump era, we're going to be dumber, less healthy, poorer, and less of a world power.
Yep.
And this is why I have no problem calling people who supported Pete Hegseth, like my old friend Roger Wicker. You're not a patriot if you supported Pete Hegseth to do this. You're not.
Yep.
But look,
and by the way, like, not for nothing, a huge number of the people who are doing this are exactly the ones who benefited from the system that they are now seeking to unwind. Donald Trump, University of Pennsylvania grad, J.D. Vance, Yale grad, Ted Cruz, Ivy grad. Like, these are people who got all of the benefits of this system and series of, decades of investment and are now trying to wreck it for everyone else.
Just as J.D. Vance is the ultimate DEI candidate. I mean, I'd love to read his application to Yale when he played up the Appalachian Boy, which is,
Yep.
for a suburban kid from Ohio who's on the golf team, was a bit of a stretch.
Yeah.
Well, look, can we put up again? Yeah, this script.
Yeah.
I can't stress to everybody what an extraordinary piece of work this is, and Garrett's body of work is the most. You have to read his book on UFOs. I mean, it's extraordinary. And as someone who worked for Bush, the last plane in the sky, this is just extraordinary stuff that no one else is doing.
Thank you.
I'd love to have another conversation with you about the oral history program of the World War II Museum.
Mm-hmm.
And which my father was one of a gazillion that they interviewed, and I found that extraordinary to keep these voices alive. So thanks, Garrett. Well, I just have to leave you with one thing. Do you have a project you're working on next?
I don't.
Everybody hates that question.
One of the things I'm really trying to think about, and I know you guys are sort of thinking about it too in your own way. We are in a real fight for history at this moment in America, and with the 250th next year, we're going to spend a lot of this next year talking about what America is and what it isn't. And I'm sort of thinking about the ways that I can contribute to that conversation and fight for the sort of set of ideals and the vision for America that I believe that is a country that is better than the one that we are seeing today.
Yes. All right, Garrett. Thank you for joining us.
Always a pleasure. Thank you so much for having me.
Yeah. Best of luck with this tour.
Thanks.